welcome back to my channel. This is Baker like Anita. Today I just have a quick tutorial on how to make a chocolate wrap around a chocolate cake. So I used chocolate marble cake for this cake, but you can obviously use any kind of chocolate cake recipe, or even a vanilla cake will be fine. So I just put some chocolate ganache down on the cake board just to make sure that it is secured and will stay stable while I'm decorating the cake. And then I've used some chocolate ganache as the filling, so this is still quite smooth and quite a runny consistency because I wanted to add to the moisture of the cake, but you can obviously wait for it to set a bit longer so that it's more of an icing or buttercream kind of consistency, but this is the consistency that I wanted. But because it's still very spreadable, I tried to keep it from spreading out onto the edges, and because of that, because it's still quite spreadable, I used a buttercream just to ensure that the chocolate ganache doesn't spill out onto the edge of the cake. So this is just to secure the cake and make sure that it's also neat and that the ganache isn't spilling out of the cake. So this is just to secure kind of a border for the cake, and it's also because the cake isn't really leveled. So because it's not level, then when I add the second layer, this layer of piped icing will also help to create a more straight and better shape for the cake. So I removed a bit of the ganache from the center, merely because I thought it was a bit too much and it was going to create an uneven shape for the cake. But also I ended up using some of this ganache to actually cover the rest of the cake because I was going to use the buttercream, but then I thought it would be better to just use the ganache, but you can still use buttercream if that's what you prefer. So I just used the rest of the buttercream that I had to fill out some of the spaces that were between the layers of the cakes, just to make sure that when I do add the chocolate wrap that there is a straight shape of the cake and that it's not skew or uneven in any way or form. So as I said, I just used the leftover ganache that I'd scraped off to cover the rest of the cake. And this part you can also use buttercream if you prefer, but because this is a chocolate ganache cake, I just used the ganache. So for the chocolate wrap, I just used a piece of string to measure the circumference of the cake, to measure the cake and how big it is, and I just cut off this piece of string, and I'm going to do the same as well for the height of the cake, just so that I know how much chocolate to spread onto the piece of parchment paper that I'm going to use. So I'm going to use this and lay it down on a piece of paper just so that I can measure out the chocolate to make sure that it covers the length and the height of the cake. I don't know if it's the length, but the whole cake basically. So this has to be really the most important step of this whole wrap process, merely because you have to melt enough chocolate to lay onto the piece of paper. So here I've laid on the string that I'd measured around the whole cake, and then I'm just going to be spreading out the chocolate to be enough for the height of the cake as well. So I usually make it a little bit higher just so that I don't have less chocolate, and you can always just chip off the bit of chocolate off the height. It's better to have more than less just so that you have more to work with. But here, what's important is to work really quickly and also have more chocolate rather than less. So I had a lot less chocolate than I needed, and by the time I melted the second batch of chocolate, the first batch was already drying, which led to kind of the first layer already setting. And then for a bit of the rest of the length of the cake, the rest of the chocolate kind of sheet, the first part was already dried. So this is a very big no-no, because once you pick up this sheet of paper and place it onto the cake, the first dried part is already going to cause some cracks, which you'll see when I pick this piece of chocolate up. So here I was going to get a bit more chocolate just to spread on, which I think I should have just remelted all of the chocolate and started all over again. But I didn't cut this part out just so they can see the mistake that I made. So you see here I added a bit more chocolate towards the end for the length, which wasn't really a good idea because the rest of the chocolate was already kind of hardened. But I just carried on because I was exhausted and I just wanted to finish. But yeah, so my advice to you would just be that melt a lot of chocolate just so that you have enough to cover the whole area that you need to cover of the cake. Another thing which I actually should have done prior was cutting off the extra pieces of parchment paper off the sides of the chocolate that I had spread out onto the sheet. This is just so that when you put the melted chocolate kind of slab onto the cake and you try to stick it on, the extra pieces of paper will get in your way. So you just need to make sure that at least the piece of paper that will go on the bottom side of the cake is trimmed and will basically just fit exactly at the bottom of the cake. So here I just lifted the piece of paper and wrapped it tightly around the cake, and because the chocolate that I had already kind of set from the beginning, it didn't really take long for me to peel it off. But ideally you would want to put the piece of paper onto the cake while the chocolate is still quite wet, just so that you don't have any cracks like I did. So you have to kind of work really quickly to ensure that you put the chocolate onto the cake before it hardens, so that it only hardens on the cake and it creates a smooth wraparound. But if you're kind of skeptical about doing it this way, you can also make different kinds of shapes. So you can create kind of circles and not a complete covered layer, or you can do it in sort of like a coiled fashion, so that when you put it onto the cake, it's not as difficult as it is to do this one, but I just like this one better because it's a much more polished look, and I think it can look really great if you work quickly enough and you have enough chocolate. As you can see, there are some parts that were cracked like I mentioned before, but I just melted some more chocolate and then spread it to kind of patch the spaces together. So here I just was peeling or breaking off some of the parts on the chocolate that I thought were too high. So I made it just so that the strawberries and the berries and all of the fillings kind of fall inside the barrier of the chocolate, so it needs to be just high enough for it to be like secured inside this space. So I just kept on filling all the berries. You can add obviously whatever you want. I've added caramel popcorn once before with some chocolate whispers, which turned out really beautifully. So you can just layer whatever you want to add here. Otherwise, that's the end of this video. Please do like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And please remember to put your notification bell on so that you can see whenever I have a new upload. So thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.